He was a man who couldn't find an English woman who caught up with his depressions, his paranoia, his lack of intellect, to be very crude about it. And Meghan gave him a safety net.
The royal family had endured arguments behind closed doors before, but this was different. One sentence crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. With King Charles, Prince William, and senior relatives gathered only feet away, Meghan turned directly toward Princess Catherine and launched a deeply personal verbal attack. Catherine froze. William moved instantly, and before anyone could contain the damage, Charles lost control in front of the entire family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In this dramatized fictional scenario, Charles brought the family together at Windsor Castle because weeks of tension had made contact almost impossible. Windsor Castle, one of the monarch's principal royal residences, carried symbolic weight. This was meant to be private ground where family could speak without cameras or pressure. The king believed Meghan and Catherine could confront the resentment surrounding Harry's place within the family and leave with something resembling peace. Meghan shattered that hope. She accused Catherine of using her influence to isolate Harry and herself from private royal life, then questioned the princess's motives and suggested that courtesy had become a mask for exclusion. Catherine stared back in disbelief. William noticed the hurt and moved closer, while Camilla and Princess Anne remained silent, sensing that the discussion had become intensely personal. Catherine answered. She said disagreement did not give anyone the right to humiliate her before her family, and her voice remained controlled as tension sharpened. Charles warned that the argument had gone far enough. Meghan continued. Restraint broke. The king struck the table with his hand and demanded that the attack stop, shocking everyone who expected a difficult evening. Harry's silence made everything worse. The Duke of Sussex, Harry's royal title within the wider family despite his changed working role, did not immediately defend Meghan or challenge Catherine. He simply hesitated. Meghan noticed. William noticed too. In those seconds, the conflict stopped looking like two opposing couples and began to feel like several relationships breaking apart at once. William then turned to his father and spoke with chilling calm. He said this was why repeated attempts at forced reconciliation kept failing. Charles understood. His eldest son was no longer talking about one evening. He was questioning the strategy that had brought them together, and beneath the explosion sat an older wound. Weeks earlier, Catherine and Meghan had held a private conversation about access, trust, and family boundaries. What was said there had never been resolved. Now it had returned in the worst possible way, and Charles knew the next truth would make this confrontation even harder to contain. Behind every raised voice in that Windsor room was something older than anger. Catherine carried years of restraint. Meghan carried resentment she believed had never been acknowledged. William had reached the limits of what he would tolerate around his wife. And Charles faced the nightmare he had spent years trying to avoid, choosing between reconciliation with his younger son and protecting the family members who still stood beside the crown. Catherine felt the accusation strike at more than one argument. Princess Catherine had built her place in royal life around discipline, discretion, and duty, and the crown meant the institution of the monarchy itself, not simply the person wearing it. To hear Meghan question her motives before the family made years of controlled loyalty feel suddenly exposed. Meghan, meanwhile, believed Catherine had become a gatekeeper, someone whose private judgment could decide how close Harry and his family came to royal life. William watched his wife absorb the attack without immediately answering. His anger grew quieter, not louder. The prince placed one hand against the back of Catherine's chair and told her she did not need to justify herself. Catherine looked at him, grateful but shaken. Across the room, Meghan read that gesture differently. To her, it confirmed that William and his wife operated as one protective wall, and she feared that wall had already closed around Harry. Harry felt the trap tightening. The Duke of Sussex, the title he retained within the royal family, looked from Meghan to his brother and understood that defending one side could destroy what remained with the other. He finally told Meghan the discussion had gone too far. She turned toward him, stunned by the interruption. Harry did not retreat, and for one brief moment the fracture inside their own side became impossible to ignore. Charles saw something even more dangerous. If William abandoned every future attempt at reconciliation, the king would lose the fragile bridge he had tried to preserve between his sons. Catherine remembered warning Charles privately that another forced meeting would fail unless boundaries came first. He had asked her to trust him. Now the monarch could see that her warning had become reality. Princess Anne remained unusually still, and that silence mattered. Anne knew about an earlier private conversation between Meghan and Catherine, one that had turned tension into open hostility. Catherine pushed her chair backward and stood. Meghan watched. William rose beside his wife. Charles said Catherine's name once, hoping she would stay. She paused and answered, "I need a moment." That withdrawal looked like shock, but Catherine already knew where this rupture had truly begun, and the point of no return had come weeks earlier. The explosion at Windsor did not begin at Windsor. Weeks earlier, Catherine and Meghan had sat down privately with one purpose: stop the resentment before it poisoned another family gathering. No audience stood between them. No husbands could interrupt. Yet one request changed the temperature completely, and one refusal created the wound that would later reopen in front of Charles and everyone he had hoped to protect. Charles had encouraged the meeting because he believed direct conversation could succeed where years of distance had failed. The king wanted Catherine and Meghan to establish practical boundaries before William and Harry became involved again. Catherine agreed reluctantly. For her, reconciliation meant rebuilding trust slowly while keeping private family matters protected, especially anything involving her children. Meghan arrived wanting something more immediate, proof that she and Harry would not always remain outside the family circle. Meghan finally made the request that changed everything. During the private conversation, she asked Catherine to support unrestricted invitations for herself and Harry to selected family gatherings whenever they were in Britain. Catherine refused. The princess explained that intimate royal occasions were private family events, not official engagements, and that trust could not be restored simply by granting automatic access after years of conflict. Meghan heard something much harsher. She heard exclusion. Catherine saw the frustration immediately. Meghan set down her cup and asked whether she now spoke for everyone. The question landed like an accusation. Catherine answered that she spoke only for herself, William, and the privacy she believed their children deserved. Meghan pushed back, saying that boundaries seemed to appear only when she and Harry were involved. Catherine remained calm, but she understood that the conversation had stopped being about invitations. It had become a struggle over belonging. Days later, the disagreement split into two competing versions. Meghan told Harry that Catherine had effectively positioned herself as a gatekeeper. Catherine told William she had merely refused to promise automatic access. Harry therefore entered the later Windsor gathering believing his wife had been deliberately shut out, while William arrived convinced his own wife was being punished for establishing a reasonable limit. Neither brother was preparing for the same argument. Princess Anne sensed the danger before Charles did. In a private conversation with the king, Anne warned him that bringing both couples together before resolving those conflicting accounts could turn tension into confrontation. Charles refused to abandon the meeting. Hours before it began, Catherine warned him again that she would attend only if personal attacks were off limits. He promised he would keep control. Catherine had heard that promise before. As she left the earlier meeting, Meghan asked, "So that is your final position?" The princess stopped and answered quietly, "Trust cannot be ordered into existence." When they faced each other again, those words were still waiting, and Charles was about to discover how little control authority could buy. For several seconds, nobody moved. Catherine had been accused before the family. William's restraint was disappearing. Harry could see Meghan refusing to retreat, and Charles rose from his chair with a force that changed the room. Even Anne stopped watching Meghan and turned toward him. What followed was no measured intervention. It was a father's frustration breaking through the discipline of a king. Meghan refused to retreat. She told Charles that silence would protect what she believed Catherine had done, then returned to the earlier Windsor conversation and insisted the princess had acted as though she could decide who belonged inside the family. Windsor Castle, one of the monarch's principal royal residences, had been chosen for privacy and reconciliation, which made the accusation more damaging. Charles had brought them there to reduce hostility. Instead, the setting magnified it. Catherine finally answered. Princess Catherine told Meghan that she had never claimed authority over the family and that refusing unrestricted access to private gatherings was not the same as excluding someone from every relationship. Her voice stayed controlled, but William heard the strain beneath it. He stepped forward and said attacking his wife's motives in front of relatives was unacceptable. Catherine immediately told him not to make the confrontation worse. The restraint she showed only sharpened his anger. Harry moved at last. The Duke of Sussex, Harry's royal title within the wider family, stepped between the opposing sides and told his brother not to speak to Meghan that way. William turned toward him. Years of resentment seemed to collapse into one stare. Harry held his ground, but he knew the argument had shifted. He was no longer defending one accusation. He was defending the way it had been delivered. Charles broke. The king struck the table with his palm and declared, "Enough." He told Meghan she would not continue attacking Catherine under his roof, then ordered both sons to stop before the confrontation became irreversible. Meghan pushed back, arguing that Catherine had created the crisis by imposing the boundary. Charles answered with the statement nobody expected. Catherine had every right to protect family gatherings, and he had been wrong to pressure her into another reconciliation attempt. Meghan fell silent. Charles asked her and Harry to step away. She turned toward the door, while Harry remained still, looking at his father as though waiting for the order to be withdrawn. It was not. Catherine stood beside William. Anne said nothing. Charles did not sit down. Then the door closed. The confrontation had ended, but the balance of power had shifted. Now Charles had to decide whether his explosion had merely stopped an argument or permanently redrawn the family's boundaries. After the shouting came something more dangerous: clarity. William no longer wanted another apology, followed by another attempt at reconciliation. Catherine had been humiliated before the family, and the prince believed goodwill had reached its limit. Charles, shaken by his own outburst, now faced a choice he had avoided: preserve access at any cost, or accept that consequences were the only way to stop the cycle. Camilla watched Charles carefully as the room settled into silence. The queen consort, the title used for the wife of a reigning king, understood that his anger had changed the discussion. Anne remained composed, but Catherine looked distressed rather than victorious. She did not celebrate Meghan's exit. She sat beside William, with the exhaustion of someone who had defended a boundary and paid for it emotionally. William spoke first. The prince told his father that he and Catherine would no longer attend private reconciliation meetings where personal accusations could be made without clear limits. Catherine listened without interrupting, while Charles removed his glasses and admitted that he had pushed her to attend because he believed persistence could still force the family toward unity. The king knew the confession hurt because she had warned him beforehand. Catherine refused to turn pain into revenge. The princess told Charles she did not want Meghan punished for disagreeing with her. What she wanted was an end to situations where closeness was demanded before trust had returned. William remained visibly angry, but he respected her restraint. Charles heard the distinction, and he stopped trying to rescue everyone at once. Anne pressed the question nobody else wanted to ask. Princess Anne looked directly at Charles and asked what would prevent the same confrontation from happening again if another gathering were arranged. The king had no comforting answer. Instead, he made a concrete decision. Future contact with Harry and Meghan would happen through separately arranged meetings until trust was rebuilt. Their presence in Britain would no longer mean automatic inclusion in intimate family gatherings. Charles turned toward Catherine and admitted he should have listened. She looked down before answering that she had never wanted him forced to choose between his sons. She had only wanted him to recognize when a boundary became necessary. William said nothing, but his expression made clear this was the minimum he expected. Elsewhere, Harry received the decision. His first response was not anger, it was stunned silence. Then the Duke asked for one thing: a private conversation with his father. Charles had finally drawn the line Catherine wanted, but the cost had reached Harry, and the next conversation would test whether father and son still had something left between them to save. Harry had walked into Windsor expecting a difficult conversation. He did not expect to leave with fewer doors open than when he arrived. When the new boundary reached him, anger did not come first. Disbelief did. Then came a silence so heavy that Meghan stopped pressing him. For Charles, that silence was worse than shouting, because the king knew his attempt to protect Catherine and William had finally created a cost he could no longer disguise. Harry listened as the decision was explained. He and Meghan would no longer be included automatically in private family gatherings, and future meetings with Charles or other relatives would have to be agreed separately. The Duke of Sussex, Harry's royal title within the wider family, understood what that meant in plain terms. Access was no longer assumed. Trust would have to come first. Meghan heard confirmation of everything she had feared about Catherine. Harry heard something broader. His father had made this choice himself. Harry sat alone for several minutes before asking to see Charles. The hurt was deeper than embarrassment. He had spent years believing that however strained the relationship became, his father would keep a family door open without conditions. Now the king's attempt to preserve unity had ended with formal distance. Meghan told him that accepting the restriction without challenging it would make Catherine's boundary permanent. Harry looked at her, but he did not answer. Charles received the request in silence. He knew the next conversation could become one of the most painful exchanges between father and son. The monarch had spent the evening trying to stop one fracture and had created another. Yet he also knew reversing the decision immediately would tell William and Catherine that their pain mattered only until Harry objected. Catherine refused to let that happen. She told William she did not want the confrontation used as a reason to sever Charles from his younger son. The princess wanted boundaries, not destruction. William had been prepared to accept a harsher outcome, but her restraint forced him to reconsider. He remained angry with Harry, yet he agreed that father and son deserved one private conversation without anyone else shaping it. Harry changed course. Instead of demanding that Charles reverse the decision, he asked to speak with him privately. No advisors, no spouses, no senior royals. Meghan stood several steps behind as he approached the room. Harry turned and told her quietly, "I need to do this alone." She stopped. He entered and closed the door himself. For the first time that night, nobody could take sides. Only a father and son remained, and whatever survived between them would depend on what they said next. The loudest moment at Windsor had already passed, yet the conversation that mattered most happened in whispers. Charles and Harry sat without advisors, wives, brothers, or courtiers between them. The king was still angry about Catherine's treatment. Harry was still wounded by the restriction placed upon him. For the first time that evening, neither man had anyone else to blame for the words he chose. Charles spoke first. He told Harry that he was not ending their relationship. He was ending the belief that every family gathering had to become another forced reconciliation. He explained that a private family gathering meant exactly that, a personal meeting without public or official obligations. Harry listened, then argued that Meghan genuinely believed Catherine had gained enough influence to shut them out. Charles answered that a boundary was not banishment, and disagreement became unacceptable when it turned into a personal attack. Harry resisted, then his voice softened. The Duke of Sussex, Harry's royal title within the wider family, admitted that Meghan's words toward Catherine had gone further than he expected. He should have intervened sooner. Instead, he had frozen between his wife and his brother, hoping the moment would somehow correct itself. Charles did not celebrate the admission. He knew silence had helped the confrontation grow. Charles then admitted his own failure. The monarch had kept pushing everyone back into the same room because accepting distance felt, to him, like admitting he had failed as a father. Each attempt reopened wounds that had never healed. Harry heard something unusual in that confession. His father was no longer pretending unity could be manufactured by force. Harry finally asked the question underneath everything. Had Catherine demanded these restrictions? Charles answered immediately, no, the decision was his. Then he revealed, through their private conversation that same evening, that Catherine had urged him not to use Meghan's attack as an excuse to destroy his relationship with Harry. The disclosure caught him off guard. Harry had expected anger from her. He had not expected restraint. Harry made one concession. He would not challenge the new boundary publicly, and he would speak to Meghan privately before speaking again. Charles agreed that father and son could continue meeting separately, but the Windsor confrontation would not be erased or minimized. Harry stood to leave. Charles did not offer a formal handshake. He simply said, "I want a relationship with you, but I will not sacrifice everyone else to create one." Harry paused, nodded once, and left without another argument. A fragile settlement existed now, but Windsor could not contain the shock forever. By morning, one private family rupture was already becoming a public royal earthquake beyond Windsor. By morning, the silence inside Windsor had been replaced by noise everywhere else. Commentators dissected the family divide. Crowds gathered beneath palace gates. Every old photograph of Catherine and Meghan standing side by side suddenly seemed to carry a different meaning. Charles understood the danger immediately. The public version of the confrontation would be louder, simpler, and far less forgiving than what anyone inside the family had actually experienced. Charles refused to answer chaos with more chaos. The royal household, meaning the staff and offices that support the monarch and senior family members, issued no detailed account of the private argument. The king believed that competing statements would turn a family crisis into permanent institutional warfare. Yet silence created its own vacuum, and reports quickly centered on Meghan's attack on Catherine, William's intervention, and the moment Charles finally ordered the confrontation to stop. Catherine felt trapped by the attention. Princess Catherine saw herself described as a victim in one discussion, a gatekeeper in another, and an emerging power behind the monarchy somewhere else. None of it matched how she felt. She told William that being defended publicly did not make the humiliation disappear. The prince listened, then switched off a television as another panel began debating whether his wife had become the deciding force in Harry and Meghan's future access to the family. Harry felt a different kind of regret. The Duke of Sussex watched broadcasters replay years of interactions between the two couples, turning smiles, silences, and old appearances into supposed evidence of a conflict now exposed. Meghan remained convinced that the confrontation proved Catherine held enormous influence. Harry was no longer so certain. His private conversation with Charles had complicated everything, especially the knowledge that Catherine had argued against using the attack to destroy his relationship with his father. Outside Windsor Castle, the story became impossible to contain. Crowds gathered near the Long Walk, the long ceremonial avenue leading toward the castle, while camera crews filled the surrounding area. One fictional newspaper front page dominated the morning discussion. Catherine's photograph beneath the headline, "The night Charles said enough." The phrase reduced a painful family breakdown to a single dramatic verdict, and that was exactly what Charles had feared. Charles still refused to retreat. He told senior aides that the new boundary would remain because public pressure could not decide how his family handled private trust. Catherine then asked for one final conversation with him and William. She did not want revenge. She wanted a principle strong enough to survive the headlines. William looked at her as she said quietly, "We cannot spend another decade letting conflict decide every relationship." The world had already chosen villains and victims. Catherine wanted something harder, an ending that did not require either. The Windsor confrontation began with an attack, but it ended with a lesson Charles could no longer avoid. Family unity could not be manufactured by placing wounded people around the same table and demanding reconciliation. Catherine did not need Meghan defeated. William did not need Harry erased. The king did not need another gathering pretending everything had healed. What the monarchy needed now was something harder, boundaries everyone would finally respect. Catherine entered the conversation without demanding revenge. Princess Catherine told Charles and William that she would not make an apology the price of moving forward. She refused to attend future gatherings, where old grievances could become personal attacks. The king understood why that mattered. Family meetings, meaning gatherings without official duties or public obligations, had become forced reconciliation sessions. Catherine wanted that pattern ended, not weaponized. Charles made the boundary clear. Harry remained his son, and private contact between them could continue, but wider family gatherings would happen only when everyone agreed beforehand and trust had been rebuilt. William initially wanted separation. The prince believed another attack on his wife should carry a permanent consequence. Catherine persuaded him that protection did not require turning punishment into policy. He agreed, but warned that another direct attack would end his participation immediately. Harry accepted responsibility in a private conversation with Charles. The Duke admitted he should have stopped the confrontation sooner, rather than freezing, while Meghan and Catherine clashed. He did not abandon Meghan or surrender every grievance, but he accepted that Catherine could not be blamed for every boundary imposed by the family. Charles heard the admission and faced his own mistake. His desperation to reunite his sons had repeatedly pushed everyone else into situations they were not ready to survive. Charles ended the cycle. The king decided there would be no more arranged reconciliation encounters between Meghan and Catherine. Any future meeting would happen voluntarily, not because the monarchy wanted the appearance of unity. Before leaving, Catherine told him that peace was not everyone sitting at the same table. Sometimes, she said, peace was knowing which doors should remain open, without forcing anyone to walk through them. Charles looked toward William, then back at her, and quietly agreed. That became the verdict of Windsor. The family was not healed, but the illusion that healing could be commanded was gone. Catherine kept her dignity. William gained certainty. Harry retained a path to his father, and Charles accepted that distance was not failure. It was the boundary that prevented resentment from becoming destruction. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.